Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this BSL Talks. We're delighted to have you with us today. BSL Talks is a series of webinars where we tackle some of the big issues in social policy, research and practice. My name is Zia Berend. I'm the Chief Strategy and Impact Officer at the Brotherhood of St Laurence. My pronouns are she, her. Today I'm wearing a black blouse, I have shoulder length brown hair, and I'm wearing pink glasses. It's wonderful to have so many of you joining us. I'm joining you from Wurundjeri country here in Naarm, Melbourne, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all of the lands and waterways you are joining from today and pay my deep respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to any First Nations people joining us today. Before we get into our incredible panel, I just wanted to start with a little bit of housekeeping. So we're joined today by Auslan interpreters Susanna and Jerry. Thank you for being here. And Diane, who is supporting us with captions. If you need closed captions, please go to the bottom of your screen and you'll either have a show closed captions box or 3 little dots with more where you can select closed captions. I'm really looking forward to a lively discussion today. If you'd like to ask questions, we encourage you to do so via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Thank you all who submitted questions in advance. We'll try and get to as many of the questions as we can today, as well as those that are submitted through the Q&A box here in Zoom. This discussion is also being recorded and will be made available on BSL's website over the coming week. So this year marked a pivotal moment for early childhood development in Australia with the rollout of Thriving Kids that we're here to discuss today. Governments, communities and service providers have the shared opportunity now to help shape how children and families access the supports that they need where they live, learn and play. Families of children with developmental concerns have faced a fragmented system, long wait times and inconsistent access to early supports. Thriving Kids is an opportunity to build a more equitable, integrated approach, one that meets families earlier, responds to their real-world contexts and strengthens inclusion. It's a once-in-a-generation opportunity to build a more equitable, inclusive early childhood development system in Australia. But to realise this potential, a lot rests on translating the vision and design for Thriving Kids into practical reality. Building on the momentum of this national reform, this BSL Talks brings together leaders from across research, policy and practice to talk about what Thriving Kids could look like and how it could be shaped to make Australia's early childhood development system more equitable. I'm really delighted to introduce our esteemed panellists. We have Professor Sharon Goldfeld joining us from the Centre for Community Child Health at Murdoch Children's Research Institute. Sharon is a leading paediatrician and researcher and brings deep expertise in child development, population health and system reform. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Caroline Crozer-Barlow, who is the CEO of the Front Project, a national enterprise working to create positive change in Australia's early childhood education system. Caroline brings national leadership in early learning, systems design and workforce capability. She was also a member of the Thriving Kids Advisory Group. Next, I'd like to introduce Tanya Oxlade, who is BSL's Head of Disability Services, Programs and Innovation. She leads a range of innovative projects, including the team delivering BSL's Enhanced Early Supports pilot, which she will be discussing today as an example of an evidence-based and effective program that could be delivered as part of Thriving Kids. Finally, I'd like to introduce Leah Robertson, BSL's Senior Manager of Early Years. Today, she will be bringing her frontline insights on integrated service design from BSL's work supporting children and families. So now that we've introduced our esteemed panellists, we're going to get into some questions. Caroline, can we please start with you? Can you please give us a brief overview of Thriving Kids? What is it? What is it trying to achieve? And what is the opportunity for it to be this once in a generational change to bring more equity into Australia's early childhood development system?
I like the way the question is like, tell us all the things. It's a
Everything.
huge, huge scope of question. So look, Thriving Kids is a $4 billion investment over 5 years by state and territory and Commonwealth governments to fund a portfolio of activities designed to shift developmental trajectories of children. So note, I didn't say Thriving Kids is a program. I didn't say Thriving Kids is an initiative. I did say that Thriving Kids is an investment of a certain amount to deliver a certain outcome in the system. And I think that's important. According to the national model, which was devised by the advisory group that I sat on and which is up on your screen at the moment, this money will be spent against a portfolio of kind of activities in two big buckets. So the first bucket is best practice universal supports and information that includes things like parenting supports or supported playgroups with extra additional allied health or peer group connections. And that is available for all families as and when they need it. And then there's on the right-hand side, you see this best practice targeted supports, which includes allied health and more individualized capacity building. And that's the model. So you kind of have both sides happening here. Now, you will have heard that Thriving Kids is for children 8 or under with developmental delay and or autism with low to moderate support needs. And that kind of cohort definition reflects the fact that Thriving Kids emerges out of a conversation about NDIS and that particular cohort was identified in the 2023 NDIS review as being poorly served by the current individualised model of the NDIS. And so that is, in fact, a really important part of Thriving Kids is thinking about children's trajectories onto the NDIS. But I think if you look at this model, and I accept there's way too many words on the screen, and I'm sorry, and we'll post a link to it. Actually, the advisory group worked really hard to not make it about eligibility of a cohort in the first instance. It actually talks about more self-directed soft entry points at the right time for families. And that's because, and here's the opportunity of Thriving Kids, here's the magic, I think, of Thriving Kids, is that the Thriving Kids idea is built on the premise that there's no predictable or magic moment for intervening in a particular child's life. You can't kind of spot them in advance and say, this one is going to have developmental delay and or autism with a mild to moderate support need. Instead, what the advisory group recognised is that child development is discontinuous. It grows in leaps and bounds, and that sometimes neurodevelopmental difference will continue, and sometimes kids will catch up on their own. And we actually don't know which children require which things at which time. But what we do know is that enriching the environments that they're in with the supports that we're talking about will support all children to have a healthy child development trajectory. So this is the Thriving Kids challenge. We're moving from the idea about finding and seeking the exact kids and kind of giving them a specialist intervention, usually somewhere else, usually not kind of where kids live, learn and play. So that's the old model. We find the kids and we fix them. Thriving Kids is about supporting all children right where they are, making sure that they have access to enriched environments, that they're surrounded by adults who have access to expertise in what good child development looks like, so that the adults who are with a child every day, the parents or the educators or the teachers, actually have the ability to kind of make those adjustments and do those prompts. That's the logic shift. And it's a really hard one for us to kind of get in our head when we're quite used to this idea of an NDIS model where a child is tagged as eligible and then they get a service. Thriving Kids is quite a different model. Now, why is this an equity opportunity? partly it's an equity opportunity because we know that middle-class families like mine are really good at getting their kid tagged to get the resources that they need, right? And so we know that that children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are less likely to be accessing NDIS supports or accessing targeted supports at the moment. But also, I think it's an equity opportunity because children grow up in environments and their development is impacted by their environments. And so, what happens when we hang everything on a diagnosis is we miss the complex interplay of things that are going on for a kid. And I used to work in disability provision in SA public schools, and we used to have a thing where it was like there's autism in the eastern suburbs, the affluent eastern suburbs, and then there's autism in the northern suburbs, which is the sort of really the harder luck suburbs. And often that autism in the northern suburbs looked a bit different and may in fact have been trauma and autism. But we called it autism because it allowed us to put extra resourcing into the schools, right? So why do we do that? Why do we think that the thing we have to do is attach resourcing and supports to a label? Why can't we instead say there are kids here demonstrating behaviours that require some kind of additional support? Let's invest in the places where the children are who have the need. And so I think for me, that's the big equity opportunity of Thriving Kids, is it stops making your access to support kind of dependent on your ability to kind of get tagged with a label, and it starts embedding those supports in the places where we know that children are accessing right now. And so, yes, that's Thriving Kids.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for that overview. Before I jump to the next question, I just wanted to flag that we're having a little bit of technical issues with the closed captions that are currently being resolved, so please bear with us there, and sincere apologies. Sharon, I'm hoping I can come to you next. Your work at the Centre for Child and Community Health focuses on tackling inequality in children's health and development and wellbeing so that every child has the opportunity to reach their full potential. Why is it so important that the design of Thriving Kids focuses on equity, and what could that look like in practice?
Thanks so much. And I just also want to note I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people as well and pay my respects. And thank you for inviting me to this amazing panel. I feel very privileged to be here. I should just mention, so I am a developmental paediatrician. So one of the great privileges that affords me is an insight into the real world of children and their families. Now my specialty, I guess it's sort of after lunch, my specialty is poo. And so that's kind of an interesting insight. So this is children who soil, which is really actually a common physiological problem, but often there are all these other things that go around it, not the least of which is the challenge of our education systems and other systems to know how to manage those children and how to work with their families. So they're a kind of micro insight into the children that are actually the children we're thinking about with Thriving Kids. The other thing I want to say is, because I want to give you a sense of who these kids are and how many of them, I think sometimes it's hard to kind of get your head around that. And I think the best way I can share that with you is the Australian Early Development Census results. So many of you will know the ADC, it's a measure of children's development completed by teachers on all children starting school every 3 years across Australia. And it's got 5 domains. So it's physical, social, emotional, communication. One summary metric that I think is really interesting, it's children developmentally vulnerable on 2 or more domains. Because if you're starting school and you're kind of developmentally vulnerable on 2 or more domains, you're probably in that Thriving Kids category. There's a few things that are going on for you that just mean that school is probably going to be a tricky place for you, and probably some stuff should have happened before you got to school as well. So what's really interesting with that is over all of Australia, it's 12.2% of children. That's a lot of kids. That's a lot of, like, this is not a, well, we'll just do something and tinker at the edges kind of system change. That is a lot of kids. But what's really important here is the inequitable distribution of those children. And this is a problem that plagues Australia across the whole range of outcomes, health and development. But for me, this is the writ large inequity because of the size of it. So I was looking at the numbers now, make sure I get it right. It's 20.3% of children in the disadvantaged areas of Australia compared to 7.6% of children in the advantaged areas. Now, I'm not going to get into this areas versus household thing because that's a whole nerd out session that's beyond this. But that sort of incredible difference, that's almost 3 times the difference. Therein lies the absolute challenge for Australia and the absolute challenge for thriving kids. And if we don't design whatever thriving kids is going to look like into the next sort of 18 months to 2 years, if we don't design it with equity from the start, then we will inevitably design inequitable systems because that's what we're really good at. We don't mean to do it, it's just that what we do. And you may not realise this, but universal systems are a really good example of that. So when we think about universal systems, we kind of think this is designed for everybody to get because there's some kind of benefit it confers. But what we know is that universal systems tend to get disproportionate uptake by the middle class for all the reasons that Caroline just told you about. They're able to, they understand it, they go, beauty, this is for me, I'm going to get it. And so by accident, they actually increase inequalities. So when I'm talking about inequities, I'm talking about things that are unjust, that they're preventable, and that they actually have a differential impact on children well into their adulthood. So here's this moment in time with thriving kids to go, hey, we've got this moment, and Caroline's just summarised it all beautifully, but it is a moment in time to go, could we do things differently that's actually meeting need where families need it and when families need it? That's an extraordinary thing. Remembering we have a bit of money on the table, as I keep saying, it's icing money, it's not cake. It's not, we're going to develop 1,700 new services for all these families. Not enough for that. But there is enough to go, we could disrupt a bit here. But if we do that without thinking about equity from the start, if we don't think about who are we reaching and not reaching, if we don't think about proportionate universalism, this amazing word that I love, but it essentially means everybody should get something. But if we want to close the gap, it has to be with the reach and intensity needed to meet the needs of these families. That is not, I'm going to give everybody else something different. It's the same stuff, just with reach and intensity in a universal platform. And that's what's going to happen with thriving kids, because all the families that can, and Caroline just referred to them, they will. That's what's going to happen. And all the families that can't, for a whole range of reasons, many of which are out of their control, they won't. And so we'll just go, we've got a new system that's also inequitable. And so this is the moment in time to go, if it was going to be really equitable, and you've done a really good job here, like you've got your Auslan interpreters, you've thought from the start, how we're going to present this webinar that as many people as possible are going to get a chance to hear it, see it later, understand it, etc. So you've thought about equity from the start. And that's what we need with Thriving Kids. That's the work we've been doing. How do you get the data into the hands of the frontline providers so they know they're getting reach and quality and equity from the start? How do you purposely design the policy environment to allow for local solution adaptation, but still have quality and reach at the heart of that? How do you create guardrails about that so people don't just make stuff up, but it is actually proper evidence-based stuff? How do you do that proportionate universalism in maternal and child health, family child health services? How do you do it in early childhood education and care? How do you do it in kindergarten? So it's not let's pretend we find all these kids and refer them into the ether, but actually, how do we respond to them here and now because they've come into my non-stigmatizing universal service and I can respond to them? And how do I work with the communities that they understand to deliver that targeted support, not like over there, but actually maybe in the local community health centre or maybe in a hub? So I'll stop there, but I do think we need to lean very hard into designing inequity from the start, because what we know is we're really bad in retrofitting equity. If you want an example, look at Gonski. Gave everybody some extra money. Do we change inequitable academic outcomes? No, because you've got to build these systems with equity from the start.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for that, and particularly for describing the children and families that we're talking about today. I'd love to nerd out with you anytime about disadvantaged households versus areas. Next, I'm going to jump to Tanya, if that's okay. So Tanya, as Caroline mentioned, the proposed design of Thriving Kids has a number of different components, including universal parenting supports and targeted supports. BSL's Enhanced Early Supports program, which you lead, has been described as a targeted support. Can you explain to us what the Enhanced Early Supports program is and how it aligns to both best practice in terms of early childhood intervention, but also the proposed design for thriving kids?
Thank you, Zia. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining today from Bunurong land here in Naarm, and my pronouns are she, her. Both Sharon and Caroline have really set the scene quite well for what I want to speak about, because we originally designed the Enhanced Early Supports program back in 2023. And one of the things that we looked at was that there were a large number of children entering the NDIS who had developmental delay, but we could see from the data weren't actually accessing paid supports that their plan allowed them to. And the figures that we're talking about are as high as 4 in 10 families, which is quite a significant group. We also heard from families and our staff that families living particularly in West Melbourne were really struggling to be able to receive supports for their children. And we were hearing tales of waiting lists of 12 to 18 months for services that were available to them. And as Sharon has really eloquently spoken about, this is a really important time to be able to catch these children and provide the supports that they need. In our model, we designed a multidisciplinary team which was composed of allied health professionals, early childhood teachers, as well as teaching staff. And we designed the model so that each worker was assigned to a family. So very much the old key worker model. We looked at how we could deliver the service, and we recognised that being able to deliver in places that were important to families, such as their home, early childhood centres, kindergartens, playgrounds, parks, etc., was a fantastic way to be able to support these families. And the model that we used was very much a coaching model. So recognising that caregivers know their children and they're their children's first teachers. But what could we do to support them? And one of the reasons that we went with the coaching model was to make sure that parents felt confident in being able to advocate for their children and to be able to support their children. We also looked at having goals that were meaningful for the families. So we sat down with the families. What's important for you? What is it that you want to be able to achieve with these sessions? And the other big difference was that we were allowing up to 20 sessions per family. So it really gave time to develop that relationship, but also to really be able to see that meaningful difference for families. And it was interesting because we actually developed the model just before the NDIS review was released in December 2023. And what was really fantastic was seeing how closely our model aligned with those recommendations, particularly the recommendation about the lead practitioner and targeted foundational supports, which has also been carried across into the new Thriving Kids model. And as you know, Zia, I can talk forever about this, but I'll pause there.
Thank you so much, Tanya. It would be great if you could just add a little bit for us about the outcomes that have been seen through the Enhanced Early Supports pilot, both at exit for the families, but also 12 months on.
Be delighted to give you some updates on that. We did some measurements. So when families entered the program, around 56% of the families reported that they felt comfortable in accessing health and mainstream services. At exit, it was 68%, but beautifully, 1 year later, it was 83%. And we had similar figures, particularly in accessing early learning and school. At entry, we were looking at 87%, at exit, 92%, and 1 year on, 98%. So it was a really huge achievement. But what's even a better illustration is talking through a couple of the case studies of the families who took part in this particular project. The first family I'm going to tell you a little bit about was a family where they had a young daughter. The mum was not really confident in her spoken English, and she wasn't really comfortable in being able to access playgroups or kindergarten. So, by working with our staff, we found an interpreter that spoke her main language that she felt comfortable with, and then we linked them into a local playgroup. And this was the first time that the daughter had been able to really play with other children. But what was even better was that the mother started to develop a network, started to develop relationships with other families, and felt much more confident in being able to access her own community. And the daughter was absolutely delighted at being able to go and play with other children. And one of the quotes, not from this parent, but I think speaks to this. It's about going into the community, engaging as a family, and it has increased our bond. Before, I had no idea where I can get any of these services. The second example was we had a young child who was living at home with her parents and her elder brother. She wasn't accessing early childhood either, but the family did have a really close bond with their local community and church. And one of the things that was really important for this family was to help develop the independence of the child, who we'll call Alice. One of the things that we found was that Alice was really used to being able to be chased around by mum trying to feed her. And the goal was about having Alice being able to sit down at the table for meal times. And that was gradually built up over several weeks where we had a timer where Alice would sit and play for 2 or 3 minutes, and we were able to build that out for 30 minutes. At the end of the session, Alice was sitting and joining her family, and 12 months later, mum's reporting that Alice is still really independent. So, and that's what we were really happy to see, was that these were changes that were sustained 12 months down the track.
Thank you so much for sharing those stories, Tanya, and giving that real colour and movement to the work that is happening in Enhanced Early Supports. Leah, I'm hoping I can turn to you now. So lots of talk around the importance of integration for children and families, especially in relation to thriving kids, so that access to support can be streamlined. Could you share a little bit with us all around the work that you are leading in relation to BSL's Early Years Integrated Approach and how it's helping to break down the barriers that families can face when they're trying to access the supports that they need, which we've already heard a little bit about today?
Yeah, thanks, Leah. Hello everyone, my name is Leah and my pronouns are she, her. I'd like to also acknowledge that I'm coming from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people today, and pay respect to elders past and present. So in talking about integration, look, this is so important. I mean, as many people on the call will know, the early years system is really complex. I've heard it described in many different ways, but I think of it like a big web, and it's difficult to navigate even if you've worked in the sector for years because it's constantly evolving. There's new services emerging, new programs, new approaches that will move in and out with the latest research, policy and advocacy. So, if you are a family raising a young child, entering that system can be really overwhelming. And especially, as we've heard, for those that are facing multiple barriers, that are facing isolation, housing, financial stress, language barriers, say as a newly arrived family from overseas, there's a lot of things to navigate, and it's a lot harder for them. So integration is essentially around reducing that load on the families, and rather than asking families to navigate that big web, of fragmented systems. It's about having a joined up system that wraps around them to support them on their journey. So the early years integrated approach is BSL's way of working across services, not just alongside them. And we've heard and seen lots of things around co-location and partnerships and collaboration, but this is going deeper to be able to support families, especially those facing the most barriers to accessing the early years system. So what it looks like is it brings community engagement, family coaching, similar to what Tanya's talked about in terms of the pilot, but not necessarily for families that have identified delay or concern with the child's development. So it's that kind of universal, as has already been mentioned. So the early supports being that Tanya spoke to being around that more targeted, and what we're trying to demonstrate is around that universal access. And we're trying to demonstrate this through strong partnerships, collaboration with early childhood education and care, council services, health and disability services. And it's all delivered within a place-based community. So I think it might have been Sharon that mentioned it's not around kind of creating a new service, but rather strengthening the connection, the information, navigation within the existing system to ensure that a child and their family can get the right supports that they need at the right time. So what that looks like in practice for us, there's probably three key things that I want to highlight. The first being about meeting families where they already are. Again, I think it's been mentioned, but what we are doing is engaging with families in familiar and trusted places. So that might be a playgroup, an early learning centre, the local library, a neighbourhood house. Our team have done some work in shopping centres because that's where families are going. And it's about having the investment with building the strong relationships and partnerships with other stakeholders to be able to do this. So having that really good partnership with a local community house where people go because they feel safe there. And at the moment, we're doing a lot of work with a local sporting club in the West because it's been identified that a certain community are having trouble engaging or are disengaged from services that are available to them. And so going to them and opening that dialogue around what would work for them and what are the barriers to being able to access early years services so that we can work together in partnership with the community to get better outcomes for children and families. The second thing is really the focus on relationships. So within our approach, first and foremost, families can build trust with one practitioner first, and they can work with that practitioner around identifying what it is that they think they may need, and then that practitioner can help coordinate the supports with the family rather than just a referral form sent off and then hoping that it lands. So we're very lucky within the Brotherhood of St. Laurence that we are delivering disability supports, we are delivering hippie programs, and we are delivering a new program called BSL Grow that helps to do this. And between those three programs, particularly in some of our trial sites, we're working together to see what integration can look like when it's done really well on the ground within those three services. And obviously, hoping that we'll be able to extend that further. But just as a small example, we had a family that had originally been connected with our disability services team, and for reasons that the family could tell our practitioner about, they had not been engaging in that service and were reconnected with one of the practitioners from our BSL Grow team from the early learning centre that they were attending. And so what our practitioner was able to do was build that trust with that family to help understand what was happening for them, why they weren't accessing supports that they'd been referred for, and work through some challenges around kind of location and transport, and being able to do some really warm referrals back into our disability supports team. And you know, it's had outcomes for the family, which has seen them connected back in place in their own community, whereas they had been kind of doing a lot of travel to go to a different community for early learning services, and also being able to connect them back in with the disability supports that they need. And it's all kind of been held with, you know, someone that they have built some trust with and can walk with them literally, you know, to a meeting and help them in advocating for themselves and their child. And finally, the third thing is around working, services working as a team and not in silos. So over the years, you know, different programs, services, you know, have been seen as working in silos and not together. And so what we're trying to do here is practitioners being able to share context, be able to plan together, be able to problem solve collectively. And this hopefully will avoid families being kind of bounced from one service to another and having to retell different experiences. So again, as I said, in place, we are lucky that we provide a hippie program, our disability services, and our BSL Grow. And so we are working up what integration in place can look like across those three services, as well as some partner organisations with council and early learning, early childhood education and care. So I suppose the key thing for me and what we're trying to shift is that families are experiencing support that's relational and continuous, and that we are reaching out into community where families are to help create those connections where they don't necessarily have to identify as having a need, but that we're here and we can connect them, you know, where they need.
Thank you so much, Leah. We're getting lots of fantastic questions through the Q&A box, so we might jump to some of those now. Caroline, I'm going to throw the first one to you if that's okay. So this one comes from Kat, and she asks, will the supports available through Thriving Kids include rich neurodevelopmental inputs of creative arts therapies? Quite a specific question for you.
No, thanks, Thea. And I can see there's lots of sort of questions about what exactly will be available in Thriving Kids and what are the referral pathways. So let me just paint a little bit of a picture about where we are and where we're going. So where are we? Thriving Kids has not yet begun. Thriving Kids money has not yet started to flow, and it doesn't start to flow until kind of 1 October this year. And then it needs to be fully stood up by the 1st of January 2028. So you're going to start to see the gradual opening of things that look like Thriving Kids in different states and territories along that period of time. Now, one of the big decisions by National Cabinet earlier this year was that they will not be changing the eligibility of children for the NDIS until the 1st of January 2028. And children who are on the NDIS on the 1st of January 2028 will be reassessed under the old criteria, right? So kids who have a kind of in the parlance, developmental delay and or autism with mild to moderate support needs, they might be able to start benefiting from some things in the Thriving Kids space over the next year and a half as things come online. But at the moment, the eligibility for NDIS remains the same. And then you're allowed to stay on NDIS under the eligibility on which you came in up until the 1st of January 2028. So that's really important because there's a lot of anxiety and a little bit of misunderstanding about what is changing. Now, I also don't want to gaslight people. So that's the formal definitions, and they aren't changing until the 1st of January 2028. It is widely discussed in the disability provider community that people are experiencing the NDIA as operating as having different thresholds in their plan reassessments and whatever. I don't know any of that. That's not my kind of bag, but it's clearly lots of people are experiencing it, so it's a thing. I just want to say that is not related to Thriving Kids. It's not related to the definition changes. That's part of a broader change of practice in the NDIA. So I think it's worth just kind of demarcating. The formal eligibility for NDIS doesn't change. So that's the first question. Second question is, what are you going to be eligible for? Which is are you going to have the beautiful cultural immersion therapy? So the other big decision that came out in January 2026 was that the Commonwealth handed over most of its money to the states. So for a little while, when Minister Butler was kind of, trying to get a bit of momentum behind Thriving Kids in August last year, he was like, maybe I'll just take my $2 billion and spend it how I want to. Maybe I'll go do some Medicare things. Maybe I'll go do this. And then the states and territories went, oh, no, actually, we quite like spending Commonwealth money. We'll take responsibility for delivery of all of the kinds of services. And you, the Commonwealth, can keep 600 million of the 4 billion to do information provision. Someone had a hilarious comment in the thing about we already have Raising Children's Network. Yes, it would be a very expensive website if they spend that $600 million on a website. Very, very confident they will not. That also involves things like phone lines for people to call, and then there's a whole bunch of really important workforce investment that the Commonwealth will do. Watch this space. We'll know a lot more about what they're doing on May the 12th. But the actual services that families will receive, whether they're kind of the targeted ones or the universal ones, mostly that's going to be commissioned by the states. And so the states will be making decisions about what is in and out of scope for what is commissioned. What we know is that they'll be commissioning according to the best practice as articulated in the Best Practice Early Childhood Intervention Guide that Tracy put out last year. So I think that's kind of a good sense of the kinds of things that they might commission. I think that answers the question, which is it will be a question for states and territories. The other thing, and someone asked how will we be able to refer into it. This is the critical part of the national model that I really hope doesn't get lost in translation. The idea of embedding a resource in a community and then allowing local decision making about who you prioritise to go in what is really important. It's a really important part of this, because if instead you do a kind of single size fits all, here's your eligibility and you definitely get that or you don't get that, or, local service providers tend to be really the best at kind of allocating scarce resources around and knowing what's going to work best for local communities. So those referral pathways are going to look different, I suspect, in different states and territories, in country communities versus in city communities. We already know in regional towns, most allied health practices are operating in a kind of de facto consortium with their GPs anyway, because there's so few resources that they're doing these kind of, how do we make sure we see the kids that we need first, and that kind of thing. So I think the referral pathways are going to look local, I think, and it's because the other part to say that we probably haven't said yet is that unlike NDIS, which is an uncapped bucket of money, Thriving Kids is a capped pool. So there's only so much resourcing, and so decisions have to be made about where that investment goes. And so we shouldn't be dishonest with people and kind of pretend everyone is going to get everything all at once. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about investing more in our existing systems so that people can get supports when they need it. But is it going to look exactly like they thought they wanted? Maybe not. And I think those are some of the hard conversations that are coming down at us.
Thank you, Caroline. That is it for the clarity, and for also covering off on like 6 of the questions we received in the chat. So efficient. I love it. We've got a number of questions about workforce, and Sharon, some have specifically asked for you to answer this question. Matthew has framed it really lovely, so I'm going to love it really well. So I'm going to ask his question specifically. So Sharon, given the dispersed workforce, not designed as a single system, are the new system functions or supports needed to create the capacity and coherence required to deliver the Thriving Kids model at scale without kind of overloading frontline workers. And Caroline, once Sharon's answered, I'd also welcome you or Tanya or Leah to jump in as well.
Thank you so much for that question. This is a really interesting moment, isn't it, in terms of thinking through how does a system respond to the needs of families versus how do families respond to the needs of a system? And that's the danger here, isn't it? That we kind of drum up this thing called Thriving Kids and then try and manipulate people into it. And so, as much as possible, many of us have been saying, don't make Thriving Kids another eligibility, something that you have to get into, because then we know it's kind of dead in the water from an equity point of view and from meeting the needs of families. But if we flipped it and said, what do families need? And then how do we orient this system to meet the needs of families, knowing that we've actually got quite a bit of juicy stuff in that system that's already there. It's not like a great big greenfield site where we go, well, there's nothing here. How do we start again? Actually, we've got a lot of really good stuff. It's not equitably distributed. It's not fantastic everywhere. Not every service talks to each other. Like, I'm not pretending it's some sort of kumbaya service system out there, but there's quite a lot in it. And if there was sufficient kind of risk appetite to think about how do we solve this locally, then that's where the magic actually happens. It's almost impossible for a state to go, well, we'll just solve this for the whole state. There are some specific things that states are going to need to work out. They're going to need to work out a commission, and there are some real live issues for states. But if there's enough risk appetite to go, well, we can't solve it everywhere all at once. Could we maybe solve it in some places with communities that are kind of ahead of the curve? And this is my long way of entering to that conversation, which is how do we support workforces who, I want to particularly talk about the education workforce, because Carol already talked about this idea, what happens in rural areas where often single workforces are actually holding a lot of families, and teachers in particular. They're often the mother, the father, the doctor, the pharmacist, the teacher, like everything for these children. And so we do have this kind of moment in time where we think about how do we give the workforce what they need to be able to do the best job they can. I'm a big believer that part of that is the ability to be able to respond. So there's nothing more anxiety provoking for a frontline practitioner to inquire and use family-centred practice to see how that family is going and not know what to do next. That incurs a lot of moral distress into workforces. So what's the kind of capacity building opportunities to give frontline, and I'm in the universal frontline, ECEC, I can keep talking about that because that is everywhere all at once where you can start to make a difference and give what they need so they know, actually, I know how to respond to this family. There's stuff I can do. How about that? There's stuff we can do in this service. And actually, there's stuff we can't do, but I'm really clear on who else can actually help me. And then what data do you need to be able to tell you, is what I'm doing right? Am I reaching the families? We talk about this triple bottom line of, is there enough of me? Am I reaching the right families? And am I good enough? I mean, not personally, but as a service. Those are really important questions we often don't ask ourselves. So to me, this feels like this important moment. If there was enough risk appetite to go, could we flip the question? Not what can the services, what do families need to do to get eligible for a system, but what does a system need to do to, particularly locally, because I think there's so much variability, locally meet the needs of families where they are and within the resources that are available. And Caroline's right, this is not open-ended, but it might be we can be, and in my experience, when you co-design with families, they are the most innovative. They don't say, give me 17 new services. They go, can this service just actually welcome me differently to this service? They don't ask for grandiosity. They often ask for very small things. So the co-design will be really important in this. And then Tony Keane has asked about the First Nations bit of this, and I think that's very important. And in fact, there's been a real leaning into understanding First Nations service delivery and all the amazing things that happen. And wouldn't it be great if we didn't go from mainstream and how do we adapt, but actually First Nations and how do we adapt into mainstream. That would be a real moment, and that can happen locally. So I think for all of those reasons, I think if we can lean into particularly universal services and how they can respond, we'll see a whole different way. And if you do that with families and the voices of children, that's a bit novel, isn't it? Actually listen to your end users, then I think we're in a whole different place. And that does require a bit of bravery and a bit of risk taking. But if we don't do it now, I'm not sure when we will.
Thanks so much, Sharon, and hopefully everyone on the line hears that kind of challenge and takes it up. Caroline, or would you like to speak to workforce?
Yeah, a little bit. And I can see, in fact, one of my fabulous advisory group colleagues, Anu Bhakti, is online as well. And I just want to shout out that there was a lot of discussion and thought around allied health workforce, and a real sense that we are not investing in our allied health workforce in any systemic way, and we're kind of leaving a generation of allied health practitioners to the market to let them kind of get through and find their way in practice. And that's letting allied health practitioners down. It's placing a burden on services that really invest in this and then kind of allows others to free ride over here on, there's a real problem with the way that we are building and growing and investing in our allied health workforce. One of the conversations that was had at the advisory group was around the kind of the challenge of supporting different ways of working with families that are less one-on-one or that are less intensive and actually are just much more responsive to the needs of children. And there was a real discussion around how unfriendly universal settings can be to kind of interacting with allied health workforces, and a real challenge around needing to improve that interface. And so as someone who worked in schools for a long time, we heard a lot from school leaders who would rightly say, I am coordinating 70 different NDIS providers into the school, and that's really challenging. But then you'd hear the NDIS providers saying, well, hang on a second, I'm trying to provide supports to a child where they live, learn and play. I'm trying to embed that practice in their experience of the classroom every day. So I want to talk to their teacher. And you end up in this really tricky situation that frankly seems wildly inefficient. So one of the kind of hypotheses of thriving kids in the allied health space is that actually we can use and grow our allied health resource in a much more effective way. And I'm seeing lots of comments in there from providers who are already operating key worker services. That's the skill set, baby. And we know that some practices are doing a wonderful job of this. How do we meet them in the universal system so that we can bring those things together? And I think that's some of when Sharon talks about local solutions, you can't do anything universally in a school system. Like I used to be in the school system. I love educators, but we are, we make our own weather in schools is the way we used to talk about it. And so you can't tell every school they're going to have to do something some ways. But locally, you will find that lots of schools would actually love to have great partnerships with professionals working in this space and would love to be working in a more thoughtful and kind of systemic and much less ad hoc and time intensive way. How do we use Thriving Kids as a way of giving everyone space to work in these ways that we know work massively better for children and the adults around them? That, I think, is the kind of exciting opportunity, but it's not going to be perfect everywhere. It's not going to happen quickly. It's going to be something we have to learn our way into, and we're going to have to be really generous with each other as we do that.
Thank you so much, Caroline. We're getting very close towards the end of our time, so I'm going to wrap us up. Thank you everyone who has put in your fantastic comments into the Q&A function. Thank you to our panelists for being able to answer as many of those as we could. Thank you to our incredible panelists, to Caroline, Sharon, Tanya and Leah, for joining us today, for sharing your insights and your expertise. It's been a really wonderful conversation. The importance of this conversation is highlighted by this. BSL Talks has received double the attendees that we usually do for these seminars, which speaks to the importance of the conversation and the importance of all of us making sure that the design of Thriving Kids and the implementation ensures access and equity for children and families. Before we fully close out, I just want to do a quick plug that we have the Enhanced Early Supports Program 1-year follow-up evaluation. You've heard Tanya speak about the program today. The 1-year evaluation report and a policy brief on Thriving Kids will be released shortly, and we'll be emailing those to everyone on this webinar once they're released next week. I also wanted to remind people that a recording of the webinar will be available on BSL's website in the next day or two, and encourage you to share it with others who may find it useful or relevant. You can also subscribe to hear about our next BSL Talks via our website, www.bsl.org.au. I would like us to virtually just give one more big round of applause to our incredible panel and sincerely thank them again. This is an important part of BSL's work to achieve an Australia free from poverty, is convening and facilitating these types of conversations. And I encourage you to stay engaged and partner with us, as it's only something that we can achieve together, that kind of outsized impact. So thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.